For several days, Nolan noticed his usually playful dog Baxter intently staring at a specific spot on the living room wall. At first, he dismissed it as a quirky dog behavior. But as the days passed, Baxter became more obsessed, until one day he started scratching and digging at the wall with an urgency Nolan had never seen before. When Nolan finally decided to break open the spot to see what was causing such fascination for Baxter, the discovery left him speechless. Nolan's dog, Baxter, had a very cheerful character, typical for golden retrievers. That was one of the reasons why he adopted Baxter in the first place. He needed some positive energy in his home after his girlfriend left him for someone else. At first, everything went great, and Baxter adjusted very well to his new life. But after a few years, Nolan began to see a change. It started small and almost too small to notice. But Baxter became restless whenever he was left alone in the living room. He would pace around and nervously wait until Nolan would be back. Whenever Nolan would leave Baxter alone in the kitchen or even his bedroom, his behavior was normal. It was something in the living room that caused this sudden change. Nolan had tried to change his toys and even moved his bed to be more comfortable, but nothing seemed to work. It even seemed to be getting worse by the day. One day, when Nolan walked into the living room after he had taken a shower, he noticed that Baxter wasn't in his usual spot. Panic set in as he hurriedly searched the house. Luckily, he found him very quickly, sitting in a corner and staring at the wall. Nolan sighed. "Hey, buddy! You scared me there. What are you looking at?" he asked his dog. But Baxter gave no kick. He didn't even wag his tail at the sound of Nolan's voice. "Bax?" Nolan asked, now a little worried by his dog's strange behavior. "What's going on, bud?" He walked over to his dog and brushed his hand over his head. That seemed to do the trick, as Baxter abruptly looked at Nolan and began to wag his tail like normal again. It seemed like he was so focused on the wall, he hadn't even heard Nolan walking into the room. Nolan laughed at his dog's silliness, but during the day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Nolan began to pay extra close attention to his dog's behavior. He noticed how Baxter seemed to become more and more focused on the wall as the day progressed. He kept going back to it, sleeping against it, even refusing to play catch just to stare at the wall. Nolan began to grow worried. What if there was something wrong with his dog? Not really sure of what to do, Nolan took Baxter to the vet. But as he had feared, the vet couldn't do much for him. There was nothing physically wrong with Baxter, and they thought it was unnecessary to do a brain scan on a dog just because he likes to stare at a wall. Nolan was disappointed, but he couldn't blame them. He knew how crazy this all sounded. Once back home, Baxter immediately ran to the wall and sat down in front of it again. Nolan sighed. What did his dog see that he didn't? He grabbed a chair from his dining room table, placed it directly behind Baxter, and sat down. He wanted to see exactly what his dog was seeing. Maybe this way he could figure out why his dog was so obsessed with the wall. But after staring at the wall together with his dog for about 5 minutes, Nolan got impatient. He jumped up and placed himself between his dog and the wall. "Baxter, you've got to stop this!" he told his dog. Baxter looked up at Nolan with his big brown eyes and wagged his tail. Nolan sighed. This isn't going to work. Then, Baxter suddenly began to whine. He touched the wall with his nose and looked back at Nolan as if he wanted to say something. When Nolan failed to do something, Baxter touched the wall again with his nose and even began to scratch at it with his paw. He clearly wanted Nolan to do something with the wall, but what? Nolan didn't know what to do. Did his dog really want him to open up his wall without even knowing what would be behind it? What if Baxter was smelling a dead animal? Or what if there wasn't even something behind the wall at all? Nolan weighed all of his options, but there was only one that could really work, whether he liked it or not. Nolan had no other choice than to open up the wall. He hesitated for a little longer, but when Baxter kept touching the wall and whining at the same time, Nolan quickly ran to his shed and grabbed a hammer. He really didn't have the right tools for this, so he just worked with what he had. "All right, Bax, back up," he said as he braced himself. Nolan swung the hammer backward and then slammed it into the wall with all of his force. A loud bang was heard through his house, and he even felt his floor shaking a little. Nolan pulled the hammer out of the wall and hit it again, and again, and again, until the hole was big enough for him to peek his head through. The dust swirled through the room, making Nolan cough and sneeze at the same time. When the dust had settled, and Nolan could breathe again without trouble, he turned on his flashlight and poked his head through the hole in the wall. He looked around, trying to see into every nook and cranny, but he found nothing out of the ordinary. When he popped his head out of the wall again, he turned to Baxter. "Sorry, bud, he began, but he was interrupted by his dog's absence. "Baxter!" he yelled. He heard his dog whining in the dining room and quickly ran to him. Baxter was now pawing and whining at another part of Nolan's wall. "Are you for real, Bax?" Nolan sighed. Now Baxter was doing the exact same thing, only at a piece of wall a few meters next to the hole. Nolan figured he already had to fix one giant hole in his wall. One more couldn't hurt. He got down on his knees and began to hit the wall again, now exactly at the spot Baxter was pawing at. He began to run out of breath from all the hitting, but he knew he would never be able to sleep with a whiny dog by his side. He hit the wall over and over until there was a hole almost as big as himself. Finally, he ran out of energy and he had to catch a break. He breathed heavily through all the dust flying around. When he finally felt like he could breathe normally again, he looked down. Baxter had gotten inside the hole and was eagerly moving his head around. "Bax, what do you see, buddy?" Nolan asked his dog. But just as he wanted to move Baxter aside to have a look for himself, Baxter jumped backward and ran away. "Baxter!" Nolan yelled as he jumped up and ran after his dog. He could see something inside his mouth, but Baxter was too quick. He ran outside of the back door and into the street. "Baxter, come here, now!" Nolan tried to command his dog, but Baxter wouldn't listen. He ran through the street, not watching the road at all. Nolan's heart was racing as he feared his dog would run onto the road and get hit by a car. He felt his breath speeding up, and he had to do his best to remain calm on the outside. He quickly jumped onto his bike and raced after his dog, hoping he would be able to catch up to him. Nolan's sneakers pounded the pedals of his bike as he zoomed after Baxter. The dog's tags jingled like tiny bells lost in the morning bustle. Around him, yards whipped past in a blur of green and brown. Baxter's form grew smaller, his pace frantic and purposeful. "Baxter!" Nolan's call sliced through the quiet neighborhood, his breaths short and quick with urgency. Baxter darted and dodged like a furry bolt of lightning, his tail a golden flag weaving between obstacles. Nolan's eyes narrowed with determination. He swerved around a kid on a skateboard, a dog walker with a stroller, and a mail truck pulling to a curb. His hands gripped the handlebars tight, the chase threading him through the daily life he'd always known, now turned into a perilous maze. Baxter's safety hung on a thread with each street he crossed. Nolan pedaled harder, eyes scanning for danger. A door swinging open, a car backing out. His mind raced with what-ifs as he passed Mr. Jensen's open garage, the Robinsons' untied lawn hose, each a hazard for his oblivious dog. His leg muscles ached with the strain, pushing him to go faster, to be Baxter's guardian against all risks. The neighborhood awakened to Nolan's desperate chase. "Baxter's loose," he called, and people peered from behind curtains. Some stepped out, coffee cups in hand, pointing in the direction Baxter had gone. Mrs. Garcia, watering her roses, shook her head in worry. "This way, Nolan," echoed down the street. Gratitude mixed with his anxiety, a tide of community rising to help a boy and his dog. Around the corner, Baxter's path veered dangerously close to chaos. Nolan leaned left, narrowly missing a hedge. His bike's chain groaned in protest, wheels almost losing their grip. A shout, a gasp, a sigh. He dodged an open gate, glimpsing Baxter's fleeting shadow. Every turn was a guess, a gamble, with stakes too high to contemplate. A boy chasing the bond of friendship, of love, on two wheels. As Nolan's shouts for Baxter filled the air, doors swung open and neighbours stepped out. Concern etched on their faces, they asked, "What's wrong?" Upon hearing of Baxter's escape, they didn't hesitate. "We'll help you find him," they declared. Lawn mowers were abandoned, and gardening gloves came off as the community banded together. Clue by clue, the neighbourhood built a map of Baxter's journey. "He darted across my yard," said Mrs. Jackson, pointing to a gap in her hedge. "He scared my cat near the garage," Mr. Patel added. Each piece of information was a beacon guiding Nolan's search. With every bit of data, the community's puzzle grew clearer, narrowing the search field as they pieced together Baxter's trail through the neighbourhood. Sirens of alarm clanged in Nolan's mind as Baxter, in a streak of fur, veered dangerously close to the street. A car horn blared, tyres screeched, and for a split second, the world stood still. "Baxter!" Nolan's cry sliced through the commotion, his feet glued to the pedals, mind racing. The driver waved an apologetic hand, shaken by the near miss. Relief flooded Nolan. Baxter was still safe, but lost. Nolan's eyes widened as Baxter, oblivious to the danger, aimed for the bustling street again. With no time to think, Nolan ditched his bike with a crash and lunged towards his errant dog. His hands reached out in a desperate dive, grazing Baxter's tail as the dog nimbly evaded the grab. Adrenaline surged through Nolan's veins, his instincts overtaking thought, all for Baxter's safety. Gritting his teeth, Nolan finally grasped Baxter's collar, his grip firm despite the dog's frantic wiggling. "Gotcha!" he breathed out, but Baxter was a writhing mass of determination. With a twist and a yank, he slipped from Nolan's grasp once more, his spirit as untamed as the wind. Nolan stood momentarily defeated, watching Baxter dash away. The leash dangled from his hand, a symbol of the ongoing chase. Picking himself up, Nolan's resolve hardened. This was no time for despair. With gritted determination, he scanned the road where Baxter had vanished and set off once more. His legs moved with purpose, powering the bike as he navigated the streets. "Hang on, Baxter, I'm coming," he whispered to the wind, a promise to his four-legged friend that he wouldn't stop until they were reunited. The community's response was immediate. People halted their cars and stepped out to direct traffic, creating a temporary safe passage. Nolan nodded his thanks, his focus unyielding as he crossed to the other side where Baxter had last been seen. It was a moment's grace, a breath of calm in the midst of chaos, ensuring Nolan's safety. With the street behind him, he continued the pursuit, hope his relentless companion. The park loomed ahead, green and inviting, a contrast to the heart-thumping chase. Nolan's eyes caught the flutter of a tail. Baxter, at last! His four-legged friend was circling a bench, weariness in his step, but eyes bright with possession. A small crowd had gathered, watching the drama unfold as Nolan approached, relief swelling in his chest. Baxter's stance was protective, ears pinned back as he eyed Nolan warily. The container, mysterious and out of place, seemed to be the cause of this unusual defiance. "Buddy, what have you got there?" Nolan asked, as the onlookers whispered with curiosity. The bond between them held strong, but Baxter's new treasure was momentarily his world, and he was not ready to share. With each cautious step Nolan took, the tension seemed to thicken. "Easy, boy," he soothed, mindful of the delicate dance between fear and trust. Baxter's loyalty was entwined with his instinct to protect, leaving Nolan to navigate the complexities of coaxing a determined dog away from his find. The park, alive with the day's tranquility, now echoed with this subtle standoff. Nolan lowered himself to Baxter's level, speaking in the soft tones he used when they were alone. "Good boy, Baxter, it's okay," he murmured, extending a hand, not for the container, but for the connection that had always bonded them. Baxter's eyes flickered, the wild in them dimming, replaced by a gleam of recognition and the beginnings of trust as Nolan drew nearer. Finally, Baxter's resistance waned, and Nolan's fingers closed around the container. It was lighter than he expected, and he handled it with the care one might give to a fragile artifact. The crowd held their breath, watching as Nolan secured the object. Baxter, now at ease, sat by his side, watching his human with a tail wag that spoke of ended adventures and secrets not yet revealed. Now, away from the park's early attention, Nolan kneels, placing the container on the grass. Baxter, curious but exhausted, pants quietly beside him. The late afternoon sun throws long shadows across the ground as they rest. With curious fingers, Nolan turns the container over in his hands, feeling its weight and studying its sealed lid, his mind abuzz with questions. Nolan lets out a long breath, his adrenaline subsiding as the fear of traffic and lost dogs fades away. With Baxter safe and the mysterious find in hand, the park's earlier chaos seems distant now. Neighbors smile and nod, their earlier concern replaced by the joy of a community that's come together. Nolan offers them a grateful, relieved nod as he stands. As they leave the park, Nolan feels the rhythm of normalcy return. He walks the bike while Baxter trots alongside, the container nestled in Nolan's backpack. The streets are quiet now, the earlier alarm just a memory. Houses pass by in a familiar blur as they make their way home, the incident closing behind them like the day's end. Curiosity replaces worry as Nolan ambles towards home. The container, a riddle in plastic, seems harmless now, yet its discovery remains a mystery. "Where did you find this boy?" he muses aloud. Baxter merely wags his tail, oblivious to the human concerns of ownership and origins. The walk is peaceful, a stark contrast to the day's earlier rush. Home at last, Nolan places the container on the kitchen table. Its presence is enigmatic, compelling. Baxter collapses with a contented groan onto his bed, watching as Nolan prepares to reveal the secret held within. It's just an ordinary evening, with the promise of curiosity quenched. Nolan's fingers itch to open the container, to understand the cause of the day's excitement. The container sits in the quiet of the kitchen, an enigma wrapped in plastic. Nolan turns it in his hands, his eyes tracing its edges, its surface smooth and devoid of labels. With only his curiosity to guide him, he contemplates the effort taken to seal it so thoroughly. Baxter, now a silent sentinel, watches with a soft panting, the day's adventure forgotten in the face of this new puzzle. Fingers poised, Nolan begins the delicate task of opening the container. He opts for a kitchen knife, wedging it gently under the lid, his movements cautious to avoid damaging the unknown contents. The air is filled with the soft clicking of the container's seal breaking, a sound oddly magnified in the silence that anticipation brings. Baxter perks up, his attention caught by Nolan's focused efforts. The lid pops off, revealing small vials and packets nestled securely within. Nolan tilts the container, sliding its contents onto the table, where they clink and settle into place. They are clear, like miniature time capsules, each a mystery to unravel. With no labels to hint at their purpose, Nolan feels the weight of discovery on his shoulders, each vial a silent secret keeper. Nolan arranges the vials in a row, their contents catching the light. Their concealment suggests importance, yet their silence on any origin story leaves Nolan with more questions than answers. What purpose did they serve? Why were they hidden? And why did Baxter find them? With each vial a potential key to an untold story, Nolan's curiosity deepens into the evening's quiet. The more Nolan looks at the vials, the deeper he falls into speculation. Each one is like a chapter of an unread book, promising tales of yesteryears. Were they stashed away in haste, or was their concealment intentional? As Baxter watches with a head cocked to one side, Nolan feels the history of these artifacts weaving a complex web in his mind. Nolan's home, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, suddenly seems a vessel of secrets. Each room might hold stories untold, histories unbeknownst to him. Had the previous owners walked amidst these same mysteries, or were they keepers of this hidden lore? Nolan's gaze drifts around, half expecting the walls to speak and reveal the vials' tales. Hoping for some indication of their provenance, Nolan wipes the dust from the vials. But the clean glass only reflects his questioning face. There's no mistaking the age of the dust. It speaks of years of concealment. Yet the absence of any visible sign or inscription only thickens the plot. Baxter's quiet presence is the only certainty in a room filled with questions. The house had been in Nolan's family for generations. Could these vials have been part of his heritage, left behind and forgotten? Nolan puzzles over the reasoning behind their careful concealment within the old walls. A sense of connection to the past begins to creep into his thoughts, merging with the tangible reality of the glass in his hands. With each vial laid out before him, Nolan imagines the narrative threads that bind them to his home. Had they been part of a larger collection, or a singularly important cache? What tales of health, of tradition, or of ancient wisdom might they hold? The possibilities seem as numerous as the stars that now peek through his window, each glimmer a potential answer to the unfolding enigma. The packet in Nolan's hands was more than an old relic. It bore his initials and birth date etched faintly across its face. The moment held a surreal quality, with coincidence seeming less likely than fate. A chill ran through him as he considered the odds. How had these hidden items, tucked away for years, become tied to his existence? It was as if the past had cast a long shadow, reaching out to him through these dusty remnants. Staring at the initials and date, Nolan couldn't help but feel a strange connection to these finds. As if these items, secreted away within the walls of his new home, had been waiting for him to uncover them. The threads of history and personal destiny seemed interwoven, creating a tapestry too complex to be mere chance. What narrative had embedded itself within these objects, linking them to his life's blueprint? The date, printed next to Nolan's initials, was a significant one. It was the very day he'd become the homeowner. Memories of the previous owner's enigmatic farewell and the lawyer's peculiar glance resurfaced. Was there a deliberate purpose behind the alignment of this date with his personal history? This was a breadcrumb on a trail to a revelation he could never have anticipated. With each discovery, Nolan delved deeper into the labyrinth of his home's legacy, feeling the rush of a treasure hunt, yet the gravity of a sacred quest. These were no mere possessions left behind. They were cryptic pieces of a narrative, wrapped in silence and mystery. As he traced the echoes of bygone eras, Nolan sensed he was awakening stories that had been whispered through the decades, untold until now. The silence of the house enveloped Nolan as he pondered his next move. It was as though the walls themselves were sentient, holding their breath as the long-guarded secret was unveiled. The vials lay before him, symbols of a history interlocked with his own, a mystery manifest from within the very foundations of his dwelling. It was clear that this was just the beginning. The walls had stories to tell, and Nolan was listening. Nolan found out that the old owner of his house was famous for using natural remedies. He started seeing the house differently, knowing it was once filled with the care of someone who believed in the healing power of plants. Nolan felt a connection to the past owner's way of life, which was new to him, but felt right and meaningful. The older folks in the neighborhood told Nolan about the woman who used to live in his house. They said she was kind and always helping people feel better using her knowledge of plants and herbs. Nolan felt closer to the house, hearing about its past filled with laughter and health, and started to feel like he was part of its long story. Nolan learned about the rituals the past owner did to make the house a peaceful place. She used the vials to bless the house and make it special, a peaceful spot for everyone. Knowing this, Nolan felt like he was living in a house that was more than just walls and a roof. It was a place with a soul. Nolan realized that the things he found weren't just old bottles and papers. They were used on purpose to fill the house with good vibes and happiness. He now looked at these things with respect, understanding that they were part of a ritual that made the house a better place for everyone. With the whole neighborhood's help, Nolan figured out that the vials were used to make the house a happy place. He saw that he had a job to keep the house as the old owner had left it, a place full of good energy. he decided to keep the tradition going, using the vials to bless his home just like she did. With newfound respect for his home's nurturing past, Nolan decided to carry on the tradition of filling his home with care. He understood the value of the old ways and the importance of maintaining the home's peaceful essence. He pledged to honor the previous owner's intent, ensuring that her legacy of wellness and positivity continued to thrive within these walls, just as it had for years before. Baxter, with his keen instincts, had always been more than just a pet. Nolan now recognized that Baxter may have been drawn to the container for reasons beyond mere curiosity. It seemed as though Baxter had known there was something special about those vials. It was as if he sensed the warmth and love embedded in the home's very foundation, a warmth he urged Nolan to rediscover. Embracing the heritage left behind, Nolan set out to revive the old rituals. He wanted to respect the original purpose of the vials by placing them back within the home, ensuring that the positive energy remained embedded in the structure. He collected herbs and other natural elements to refresh the contents, preparing to bestow a renewed sense of harmony and balance upon the house. As Nolan carefully placed the vials back behind the wall, he felt the storied history of the house merge with his own. It wasn't just about sealing away a set of old containers. It was an act of dedication to the home's spirit. With the wall patched up, he sensed the beginning of a new era, one that promised continuity and hope for both him and Baxter. With the vials safely ensconced once again, the secret of the house's vibrant past remained locked within the wall. Nolan and Baxter, bound by this adventure, continued their daily lives enriched by the knowledge of the home's hidden strength. And as they settled into the rhythm of everyday peace, the wall stood silent, a custodian of mysteries and a testament to the enduring power of tradition.